There's a new report out from the Congressional Research Service, which is a nonpartisan research arm of Congress. And they have some war figures to share with us. What they did is they looked into how much we spent on war since 9/11. And it ain't pretty, as you can imagine. Quote, American taxpayers have shelled out roughly $1.6 trillion on war spending since 9/11. That's roughly $337 million a day, $14 million an hour, or nearly $250,000 a minute. Every single day for 13 years. Now, it's very important to note that we're talking about what we already spent. We're not even including in this future projections, which are guaranteed in some instances that there's going to be a hell of a lot more spending because we're still involved in the conflict in Afghanistan and now in the conflict in Iraq, also in Syria and the drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, although that doesn't add nearly as much to the cost. So they continue, U.S. taxpayers have already spent more than $1 billion or $8 million a day on airstrikes against the ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So think about that. This is just the thing that we started doing recently, the airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. They're saying, even for that, we already spent more than $1 billion. I remember when we were having the debate about this recently. We already spent over $1 billion for just that specific action. Never mind everything else, which we just went over the figures for. They say 92% of the war-related expenditures since 9/11 have flowed into the Pentagon. Just 6% has been spent on foreign assistance and diplomacy, and 1% on medical services for veterans. That says it all right there. Now, a lot of people are probably wondering, why is it that we're not really seeing any advancement in the war on terror? Why is it that we have just as many enemies today that we did in 2001? In fact, if you really want to dig into the numbers, the reality is we have more enemies today than we did in 2001. So the war on terror has had the exact opposite effect of what they say they wanted it to have. If the idea was to get rid of terrorists, we just increased the number of terrorists. So it's been an abject failure. And a lot of people are probably thinking, well, why is that? Well, probably because 92% of the money that we spent was to blow shit up and kill things. And only a tiny percentage of what we spent was actually to try to build bridges and become friends with certain people in certain places. A lot of people don't like to look back in history and learn the reality that when you do reach out a helping hand to people who you would otherwise consider your enemy, that's when you guys end up becoming allies. Look at the Marshall Plan. I mean, there were times in American history when we decided to help our enemies after they were defeated. Now, I'm not saying you do that with al-qaeda. I'm not saying you do that with the Taliban. But what I am saying is, if you went into these areas and you went to the Pakistani government and you went to the government in Afghanistan and you went to the government in Iraq and you didn't de-Ba'athify the government in Iraq, number one, because that's what led to the problem in the first place. If you went there and you worked with them and you propped them up and you built schools and you built hospitals and you said, hey, America's your ally. You know who your enemy is? The al-Qaeda motherfuckers at the border, the Taliban motherfuckers at the border. Well, then guess what would have happened? Green talks. Money talks. People would have went, oh, yeah, that whole thing about you guys being the infidel and this whole thing about you guys being the great Satan. Hard to continue to say that when you just gave us hospitals and you just gave us schools and you just gave us some financial assistance. And if we went down that road instead of going down the road of building tanks and machine guns and airplanes, we could have spent much less money and had the desired result. Whereas here we spend more money and we don't get the desired result. which, by the way, at this point in the conversation, the more conspiratorial side of me comes out, and I say, oh, well, maybe that's on purpose. Now, to be clear, I don't believe that, but I do believe that there are financial incentives to continue this war machine, because a lot of people make a lot of money from the business of war. In fact, if you don't take my word for it, take it from Republican President Dwight Eisenhower, who said, beware of this military-industrial complex, because people are going to want to fight more wars, and they're going to be more nonchalant about war if they end up getting rich off of them. I mean, we just did the story yesterday how over $100 million went to build more Abrams tanks when the military and the Pentagon said, we don't need any more Abrams tanks. No thanks. But what did Congress say? No, we're going to make you take them. Why? Because the people in the corporation gave money to Congress, and Congress gave them their favor right back. And that's the way it works not only with Abrams, but with Raytheon, Boeing, KBR, Halliburton, and you name the company. And they very smartly, in a very clever way, they decided, why don't we put defense contractors, defense corporations and companies in all 50 states so that there's jobs tied to this in all 50 states. So Democratic politicians and Republican politicians alike will not want to cut defense spending, because that means they're cutting jobs in their own district with their own constituency. So we have this perpetual war machine. In America, our welfare is warfare. In Sweden and Norway, their welfare is welfare. Their welfare goes to education and healthcare and jobs. Here in America, our welfare money, our tax money, goes towards money for the big banks, $80 billion worth every year. Corporate subsidies for Wall Street, money for Walmart, money for ExxonMobil, money for pork barrel spending, and money for war. And we see the results right here, man. We spent all this money, and I saved the most stunning fact for last. We spent all this money and we have nothing to show for it. In fact, it's the opposite. It's gotten worse. Very similar to the war on drugs. We spent all this money trying to kill drugs, trying to make it so that nobody takes drugs at all, period, anymore. And that's not just my opinion. This isn't hyperbole. If you go back and read the reports from the 1980s and the 1990s, you have people who were saying, no, we're going to try to eliminate drug use, period. No more drug use. And what's happened? Since we started waging the drug war, more people are taking drugs now. So we wasted over $1 trillion since it started, and now more people are taking drugs. So you had the exact opposite effect of what you wanted, and you just flushed $1 trillion down the toilet. It's the same thing with the war on terror. But again, saving the most stunning fact for last. By the year 2050, when all is said and done in Iraq, or hopefully, who knows, maybe we'll still be there and this number will go higher. But you know what the estimates are? What we will spend in total? $7 trillion. And that's just Iraq. That's not Afghanistan. That's not Syria, where we're now involved. And that doesn't include the other places we're doing drone strikes. And that doesn't include our 900 military bases around the world. $7 trillion. Now, I stop and ask you, what could we have done with those $7 trillion? Here's the answer. Anything we fucking wanted. We could have built the best universal healthcare system, single-payer system in the world by far and away. We could have spent it on research and development to cure cancer and cure heart disease and prevent problems that are plaguing society. We could have spent it on universal college. We could have wiped the student loan debt clear for everybody in America, and we could have done it 6 or 7 times over. But we didn't spend the money on that. We spent it in the worst way possible.